Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's program, LGBTQ Youth in the Foster Care System, co-sponsored by the Family Law Section, the LGBTQ Plus Section, the Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and the Committee on Continuing Legal Education of the New York State Bar Association. Today's program will run from 1 to 2:30 p.m. During the program, if you have questions for the speakers, please use the Q&A box in the Zoom portal. Our speakers today represent the Richmond County Family Court, 13th Judicial District, the ACS Office of Equal Strategies, the Ally Forney Center, the Trevor Project, and the Center. We appreciate you all being here with us today. And now I'm going to turn the program over to Judge DeLizzo to get us started.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us. Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. So on behalf of the Richmond County Family Court, 13th Judicial District, I thank everybody for joining us today. I thank the sponsors, in particular, the Family Law Center section of the New York State Bar Association, the LGBTQ Youth Plus Law Section, and the Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I want to thank today's presenters because obviously I could not have done this without them. And this is now, I believe, the second time that we are hopefully blazing a trail, but at least discussing this issue. Special thank you to my court attorney, Jane Kuznetsov, who will be introducing the speakers today. And again, without her help and assistance, I would not be able to present today. We would not be able to present this program today. Special thank you to one of our local attorneys, Claire Cody Miller, for her insistence that we address this issue again. We've also invited several New York State senators who hopefully will join us, including Brad Hoylman, Jaspari Brisport, and Jessica Scarcella-Patton. I don't know if they've joined yet. I believe Senator Brisport has. So I thank you and welcome. And again, thank you to our presenters. Before we start, just briefly, I was the first openly gay judge appointed to Richmond County in 2015. I was met with with welcome, some puzzlement, but I have to say over the last 9 years, I've forged a very good relationship with the bar out here, and they are eager to do their part in assisting and representing the youth that we're going to talk about today. And again, I want to give a thank you to our local bar. I read an article this morning while I was preparing for this, early this morning, that focused on the Biden administration's attempt to expand Title IX that would give additional support and protection to LGBTQ youth in educational settings. I read, unfortunately, that in several states, that effort has now been blocked by way of judicial action. So it seems to be we have expansion, opposition, expansion, opposition. So hopefully, as a result of this, we can develop strategies that not only enlighten the general public, but also members of the bar and my colleagues on the bench, so that they can understand what a crucial subject this is and how our decisions on the bench impact the lives of real people every day, some of whom are the most vulnerable people within our society. So again, thank you all. And with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Jane for the first introduction.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is the second time we're putting this event together with the same speakers, and I think it was extremely informative the first time around, and I hope that we can reach a wider audience. I definitely received a lot of outreach on my end from people who had an opportunity to log in, observe, listen in, and they were extremely interested in the materials, the services. They had asked me for contact information. And I did provide it. So, I hope that it was put to good use. So I'm really glad that we get to do it again. The order that we're going in today had to be slightly modified just due to some scheduling things with the presenters. So I'm going to introduce them in the order that I anticipate that they would be going in. We have Peter Karras, who is the Director of Youth Counseling and Support at the Center located in Manhattan. They provide obviously services for youth and young adults, LGBTQ plus. Their mission statement is and to empower people to lead healthy and successful lives, and they offer a lot of resources. There's obviously an organization as the center in each borough, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and Peter can definitely correct me if I'm wrong when he is having his presentation. And I know that depending on the location, sometimes it's more or less convenient, but if I'm not mistaken, I think that the one in Manhattan, which is where Peter is from, there are more services than perhaps some of the smaller boroughs that have to offer. So it's good just to have those resources available. Next, we anticipate having Stephen Gordon from ACS present, who is running a little late due to another engagement and commitment. He's the director of LGBTQ plus equity strategies at the ACS Office of Equal Strategies. Obviously, as the Administration for Children's Services, they provide a ton of services and have resources that can assist youth make proper referrals and really provide the services to a population that unfortunately needs them more than perhaps someone else who isn't involved in the foster care system and with ACS, and he'll be able to tell us about what his unit does and what services they offer. We have Alex Rope from the Alley 40 Center. He's the president and executive director. They also have a variety of services that they offer to their youth. It's health services, transgender services, educational and vocational services. Recently, I believe the Alley 40 Center was involved in an event that ended up raising, if I'm not mistaken, a significant amount, which would obviously assist in all the resources and services that are provided for free by all of these organizations, as well as Alley 40, to assist the youth that need it. There's definitely reforms that I know that Alex and his staff work hard at, you know, and pioneering and making sure that additional services are provided, as well as legislation that can really shape and change things long term. And then finally, we have Jonah DeChance, who is from the Trevor Project. I apologize. He's a senior research scientist, and Jonah would be able to tell us a lot of statistics, regarding homelessness, housing instability among LGBTQ youth, which unfortunately often enough ends up affecting the youth that are within the ACS system in foster care, because their placements aren't always long term and they don't always work out. So the Trevor Project is there, obviously also providing a ton of resources. So not to take up any more of your time and to make sure that our presenters have the time they need to present their information, I'm going to turn it over to Peter, who's going to go first with his slides as well as his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here with everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen and get my presentation up. I'll do that. Okay. Right. Okay. Hopefully you can see my presentation. So, yeah, just to start, my name again is Peter Karras. My pronouns are he and him. And I'm the director of youth counseling and support at the LGBT Community Center in New York City. And yeah, we only have one location, but I know there are other community centers in like Staten Island, and Brooklyn has a Pride Center. So each borough has kind of different programs. But the center in Manhattan is, I believe, the largest LGBT center on the East Coast of the USA. So we are able to offer a lot of services to the community all in one place, which we're incredibly grateful for, including a lot of young adult services. And with that, we do serve a lot of youth who are involved with the foster care system, the child welfare system. So, you know, we offer kind of a range of sort of holistic services to help meet their needs, which I'm going to talk about today. And I wanted just to give some context. Jane just talked about the mission of the center, so I won't repeat it, but basically, you know, we're about empowering the community and really celebrating the diversity within our community while also advocating for justice and opportunity. And here is a visual representation of the center. So if you're ever in Manhattan, please stop by. We're in the West Village. on 13th Street. We're pretty centrally located in Manhattan, so definitely we're open pretty much every day of the year. And we have a coffee shop, we have a bookstore, we have a garden. So it's a nice place for just people to stop by, as well as having a lot of services for youth and young adults. And just to provide a little bit of history, so the center has been around since 1983. And it started out as the Lesbian and Gay Community Services Center. And over the years that the center has evolved, of course, to include more aspects of our community in a more comprehensive way. And the center really started out through grassroots organizing, through different activists, doing work, and a lot of it in response to the start of the HIV and AIDS epidemic, when there wasn't a lot of support for the community and people really coming together. So a lot of organizations that are now really big organizations, such as the Callan-Lord Community Health Center, ACT UP, does a lot of advocacy. They got their start at the center. And the center is in what used to be the Maritime Trade School, and was sort of an unused building that these activists were able to take over and eventually buy from the city. So the center actually owns the space, which is pretty amazing. So again, we have history going back to 1983 in this location. And in terms of youth programming, so our youth services started in 1989, and this was based with youth basically organizing once again. It was basically a youth-run meetup group that happened on the weekends. It started out with, it was a long acronym called Bike Litany, which I will not even try to break that down. But basically, it was community members coming together and wanting to advocating for a space for youth to come and find support. And so that's when this started in 1989. And over the years, it's kind of transformed into a more formal program with a variety of funding and specific services. And so in terms of just to give a brief overview of the general youth drop-in program, so we run an after-school program for LGBT youth and young adults, as well as allies, ages 13 to 22, which is all free services. We're open Monday through Friday from 3 to 7:30 with a range of drop-in groups, paid internships, art and creative activities. And we also offer a range of what we call prevention services, focusing on preventing substance use with youth. We have an outpatient recovery program for substance use treatment, and we also have a drug and alcohol-free clubhouse space. So really trying to offer pro-social space for youth to gather and find community that don't involve drugs and alcohol, but are very affirming for young adults. So in terms of our drop-in programming, every day of the week, we have different activities happening. These are just some examples, including a flyer. So we have a Lights Out sex education workshop. And also it's basically, we want youth to feel like they have a space to talk about sex and sexuality that isn't about shame or feeling judged for who you are. So, that's one of the topics in terms of the Lights Out group, what that looks at, and kind of getting information so they can make informed choices about, their health, their well-being. So really it's about, empowering young adults. So some other examples of groups, we have a community discussion group. We have a gamers group, so youth who can play video games, board games. We have a ballroom group called Vogue Basics and Snap. So, ballroom is a big part of our community, and youth can come and learn how to Vogue and also take part in the dancing. We have a queer movie group. So, each day of the week, there's different things for youth to get involved with, to make friends, find community, have a good time, and feel really welcome in the space. We also have a lot of events. And so one of the nice things about being in this big building is that we have a dedicated youth space that's just for youth with staff. So it's kind of a safe space where there are not other adults that youth can come from our programming. But we also have access to the main building, where we have some larger auditoriums that can hold up to like 200 people for bigger events. So throughout the year, we have events for youth. So we have a Valentine's dance called like Love Yourself Dance. We have a big Thanksgiving meal called Thanks for Being Queer. We have a big Halloween party for youth, which this year was called Hello Queer Kiki Monster Ball. So we definitely try to have events, that are celebratory for youth, that are safe, that are affirming. We also have things that we have a camp program in August. So every year we have a week-long free camp. We used to go to a YMCA camp in New Jersey, but since the pandemic, we're doing a day camp model. So in New York City, we take youth on different kinds of field trips to museums and activities throughout the city. We have groups around body positivity. We have an eating disorder group for LGBT community members at the center. And we also offer paid internships, which I'm going to talk more about in a minute. So I'll come back to that. So these are some examples of internships for youth to join. And what's cool about these is that these, most if not always, are paid. So youth actually earn a stipend, or they get paid to take part in that. And recognizing that a lot of young adults are, working on becoming more independent, are trying to, be more responsible, and want to learn some, job skills in terms of how to apply for jobs, how to, earn their own money. So our Ready internship, which is for high school students, is actually a career readiness internship. There's a whole training portion of that where they're learning, again, how to look for jobs, how to create a resume. And then they're all placed in our community partner site to do work where they're actually paid hourly. And that's, for a number of months. And we have community partners such as, like, we've worked with the Brooklyn Public Library, or, a community health center next to the center. So there are different kinds of work experience for youth. And for some of them, it's their first time having that work experience. And again, for youth who are struggling with stability, having access to a job opportunity is a really, big opportunity for them to get some of those skills, to feel like empowered, and to be able to, start to be able to take care of themselves in some ways. We also have an internship called ROAR, which is about social justice, where each cycle youth get to pick a different social justice issue. They've talked about things like youth mental health, youth, housing instability, or, the impact of gentrification. So they get to really decide what they want to focus on, and then they plan a project and an event for the community to help educate community members around what they've learned, and, opportunities to advocate around these issues. And they also get paid a stipend to take part in that. We also have some creative arts internship opportunities. So we have the Youth Pride Chorus, which is in partnership with BAPA, which is Big Apple Performing Arts, I believe, who does the Gay Men's Chorus. And so twice a year they have a concert at the center, and it's a really wonderful experience for youth to get that opportunity to, who enjoy singing, to perform, to feel celebrated. So that's happening. And then we have an internship about theater and Broadway called Center Bay, where youth can learn more about, like, the behind the scenes of that field. So, these are just some ways that youth can get involved through internships at the center, which they can apply for. And we also have scholarships. So basically, for youth who are applying to go to college, we have scholarship opportunities. We're actually giving out the scholarships in June for the latest cycle. So we're giving out, basically up to around $10,000 to young adults to help them to, help with their career, their educational goals, around paying for tuition for colleges. And it's, the youth apply through writing some kind of, whether there's an essay, or there's like brief application for them. So that's something we offer to youth. And as I mentioned, we have our summer camp. And we also have a program called Center Works, which is somewhat recent. It's for ages 18 and over. And it's again, career readiness focused. So we offer career counseling and some career panels and workshops. And basically, it's recognizing that young adults who are in this emerging adult transition age range, they need help, sort of when they are aging out of some youth programs, but need support in terms of becoming more independent, that they need help kind of getting settled, finding work, navigating the workforce, and sometimes in a way where, it hasn't always been affirming to LGBT and queer people. So they're kind of getting help to connect it to more queer affirming work opportunities. We also have like a job fair at the center. So things like that. So basically recognizing that for young adults, especially thinking about when they're aging out of things like foster care, they need help and resources around becoming more independent. So that's sort of what this is about. We also, have a partnership with the California Center, who I know is represented here today. So we have Unity Works. So it's basically a partnership where there's job training. Again, there's employment opportunities. And this does not have, sorry, this age range. It's actually, I think, 16 to 24. My apologies. But so that's, another partnership we have. And we are partnered with other community organizations to create these kinds of opportunities for young adults. And we have an internship called Safe Too through our Center Works program with young adults. And this is about helping them train to go out into the community, to reach other community members. So for instance, they go to schools and they talk to school staff, and they also talk to students around how to be allies to the LGBT community, to how to address policy change, to be more affirming. And they also do tours. So if whether it's a school group or different kinds of tour group wants to come to the center in person and learn about what we do and how we serve the community, we can provide that. And so it's really cool to have young adults who are actually part of the community take on a leadership role in providing that to the community, while also providing different kinds of workshops. So again, if that's something that any of your organizations need help with, or your colleagues around like learning about how to support the community, we can provide different kinds of training through this program. And I alluded that we have a range of substance use services, and recognizing that, unfortunately, we know queer youth are more representative in terms of their substance use. They're more likely to use substances, and that's in a large part because of the various stressors that our community faces in terms of not having access to supportive services, facing violence and discrimination and isolation. So, of course, we're trying to address those factors. But while our young adults are struggling with substance use, we also want to make sure they have affirming support. So we're grateful that we can offer a range of services in one place. So we offer prevention services, treatment services, and also our clubhouse space for young adults. So the prevention services are more like short-term counseling and also evidence-based closed groups focusing on health and wellness. These are just some examples of the curriculums we use. We did create a curriculum in-house called Proud and Empowered, which is looking at the different areas of stress that queer youth often face. Like it could be family conflict or, harassment at school, or kind of issues around religious affiliation, and kind of helping youth navigate those different domains. So that's like a 10-week group that youth are kind of meeting on a consistent basis to get support around that. We also do something called SBIRT, which is screening and brief intervention and referral to treatment. So we can go out into the community. We have staff who can do outreach at community events and talk to young adults about their experiences with substance use. And if they need support, we can refer them to services, whether it's on-site at the center or elsewhere in the community. And these are just some examples of the prevention closed groups. So we have a new group called Tea Time, focusing on the experiences of transgender and non-binary youth, recognizing that they really needed a dedicated space to come together and feel supported and talk about their needs and their experiences. As I mentioned, we have Proud and Empowered. We also have a group called Mariposa, which is a Spanish language group. So talking about youth experiences with, Latina culture and also being queer and how those things intersect. In terms of, and I want to be mindful of time, but just to talk about our outpatient recovery program. So we do have a full OASIS licensed outpatient clinic for young adults ages 13 to 25, offering substance use treatment, including psychiatry, weekly counseling, and recovery focus groups for young adults. And we also encourage family members, including chosen family members, to take part. And again, recognizing that young adults in our community, because of the variety of stressors they face, they often are turning to substance use for coping, and they often need support. And we want to look at holistically how we can address that substance use while providing youth the other resources they need to navigate the things that they're dealing with, whether it's housing support or case management or looking for a job or just finding a sense of community. We want to help kind of address those different factors which play a role in substance use. And we do also provide Metro cards and meals at our groups that are in person. And we do offer hybrid services. So we offer counseling in person or virtually. So, actually, if someone's outside of New York City but wants to access the services, we do have some groups that are virtual, and also counseling and psychiatry can be virtual as well. Yeah, and this is just the flyer for our recovery program. And I can send this all out as a PDF, just as an overview of the services we provide. And then the Clubhouse program is more about having, again, a drop-in space that's, not focused around drugs and alcohol, provides an alternative to substance use and a space to build community. And just some examples is, we're providing different kinds of support groups, leadership opportunities for youth to support their peers and to learn leadership skills, to take, youth on field trips. We have something called our Clubhouse Advisory Board, because we really want youth that feel like they have an input and say into what's happening in our space. And again, just promoting health and wellness and self-care. These are some examples of activities. So we had a jiu-jitsu demonstration in December. We have quarterly open mic events and music performances for youth in partnership with an organization called Road Recovery. So we have, a variety of different things that are happening for youth. We offer family counseling as well. So this is for youth ages 5 and up and their parents or caregivers. So again, thinking about permanency and youth who are involved in foster care, this is something where there's challenges for parents to be affirming that they can get help through this program. It's a free service that we offer to the community. And we offer something called the Lift Institute Family Therapy training. And this is for providers who want more skills around working with LGBT youth and their family. So it's basically a certificate program where providers or clinicians who work with families can get specific skill set and training around this community and how to be better supports. And then in terms of like joining any of our services, of course, you can always email Youth at Gay Center, which comes to me and my colleague. And also youth or anyone interested in services, we have this QR code and this link. So basically this is a pre-registration form that will then connect them, and basically based on what people enter in terms of what their interests or needs are, they'll get connected to the right program area. But people can always write to youth@gaycenter.org if they have any questions. And I know I'll come back to this questions, and this is just my information, and we'll share this after. And of course, my colleague Melissa, who's the other director of our youth programming. So we run the youth programming together. So I just want to share information. And again, I know we'll have a chance for questions later, but yeah, feel free to reach out, and definitely happy to support if there's any troubleshooting around a youth concern and how we can support. Like, feel free to reach out. Happy to brainstorm with you all. And I will stop sharing from here, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was really informative. So the next speaker, I didn't see any questions related to the presentation that Peter had just stopped sharing in the Q&A. So I'll either wait for someone to type in the question, and hopefully you're still logged in to answer that question at a later time, or maybe while I'm talking, someone wants to put in a question that they have. In the meantime, the next presenter is ACS, and we have Stephen Gordon. He is logged in and with us now. He missed our introduction, but he is the director of the LGBTQ plus equity strategies at the ACS Office of Equal Strategies. And Stephen, while Peter was talking, someone did put in a question, and I think that this is a question that maybe specifically one that ACS could answer. So before you begin your presentation, I just want to read the question, and if it is a question that you're able to address, perhaps it's something that you can address in your presentation. For children in foster care in New York State under the care and custody of a local CPS entity under OCFS, essentially, if a trans child desires HRT, but their parent does not, is there a set policy for OCFS for New York State that would provide guidance as to what legally is to happen?
I can't speak for the state, but I can speak for ACS policy, which is city governing, which says that any minor that's in the care and custody of the commissioner of ACS, youth have to obtain parental permissions, but there are very concrete ways to go. If a parent is not going to give said permission, there are concrete ways to go about it that I'm happy to discuss more concretely, because it really does vary by the young person, the family, and the situation. But I'm absolutely happy to talk about that as it pertains to certain young people or certain cases. Young people who are over the age of 18 still in foster care can consent for themselves and are in healthcare via New York State Medicaid, and that's where the majority of their services will be paid for by. So if folks actually want to talk about a specific case, because it is an ACS policy, it's not like anything that's so blanket, I will put my email into the chat, and you could feel free to reach out. I'm happy to consult and bring in our Child and Family Health Office, which governs all of the foster children's medical issues. And with that said, hello, my name is Stephen Gordon. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the director of ACS's LGBTQ Equity Strategies Office. My role is to ensure that queer and trans youth in the ACS spectrum and continuum are affirmed, cared for, and treated with respect. Today, I'm going to talk about specifically what my office does and how we can support, I'm imagining there are mostly lawyers in the space, how we can support your clients and thus support you for young people who are either in foster care, experiencing juvenile justice services via ACS, or families might have an open investigation. So I'm just going to put my deck. second. While I talk, please feel free to put questions into the chat. So first, just a quick history of the ACS Office of Equity Strategies. Mayor de Blasio, before he left office, mandated via executive order that stated that every single government agency needed to formalize and concretize equity work. ACS was one of the first 3 agencies that piloted this effort, and thus my office was created. We've got 2 units. There's a race equity unit and the unit that I head up, the LGBTQ equity unit. ACS has been doing LGBTQ specific work since the turn of the century in an informal way. There have been people on the ground who are experts, whether in child protection or preventative services, really supporting families that had LGBTQI young people. In 2012, we formalized our LGBTQ work and my position was created. Of that, I will tell you exactly what my unit does and how I can support. So our unit offers advocacy of LGBTQI youth and families. We work closely with our family permanency, our juvenile justice, our child protection, our family court legal services, and our children's center services. My office is one of those very few in the ACS system that is universal to the entire system. Part of our responsibilities is to write, review, support in the implementation of ACS policies that are inherently anti-racist, non-homophobic, or non-transphobic. My office provides and operationalizes system-wide trainings for ACS staff, our provider agency staff, as well as foster parents. We're going to talk a little bit about language later in my deck, but really something else that we've been doing is, language is critical to ensuring that communities feel safe. So we've been reviewing and editing formal agency documentation such as intakes, etc. Youth voice is critical to any youth serving organization. My office heads up an LGBTQI subcommittee of the Youth Leadership Council, which is ACS's mechanism to hear directly from youth that are either in foster care or have experienced juvenile justice services. And my office also provides technical assistance around best practices for working with the population throughout our system. In 2021, we published what we call the ACS LGBTQA Action Plan. The purpose of this was to decrease unnecessary entry of LGBTQI youth into foster care, increase placements with relatives and foster families for the population, as well as reducing placements in the group homes and larger campus institutional settings, and generally improve the overall well-being of the population in foster care. It's really important to note that, I don't know if I use the slide here, and we published a study in 2020 where ACS really wanted to look at the experiences of LGBTQI youth in a foster care setting specifically, and also gauge the population around their experiences. And we found that LGBTQI young people are overrepresented in foster care. Roughly 1/3 of the young people that we surveyed over the age of 12 reported being some space on the LGBTQI plus spectrum. With that said, we really wanted to hone in on creating specific services that would support youth and their families and workers who were working directly with the population. So one of the first things that we're currently doing, and it's such a task, is we're updating our ACS LGBTQI plus policy. ACS, New York City is one of the few child welfare jurisdictions that has policies in place that are specifically written and published to protect the population. Our current policy is fine, but we definitely absolutely need to update it. It's about 10 years old. So we're working to update it with new language and really look at supporting LGBT youth from a universal lens in regards to ACS. We're not just looking at our foster care young people, we're looking at young people who might be experiencing ACS via our child protection services, our prevention services, and definitely our juvenile justice services. My office is really adamant about continuing to increase supports for youth in care. And there are many ways to do that. When we say in care, like any young person whose family is in some way impacted by either child welfare or juvenile justice. Really looking at how we can support the workforce that works directly with the population and their families. A few things that we do is we fund 2 training programs, one via the LGBTQ Center, who's here, and another via the Ackerman Institute that trains clinicians, New York State licensed clinicians, on how to provide ACS involved families with cultural competency, responsiveness, and really supporting families in their journey to affirming their LGBTQ AI identified child. We also we provide some large scale trainings, which I'll talk about later. But we also do learnings throughout the year where we really want to look at increasing our cultural responsiveness and the competency of our workforce. So throughout the year, we'll do these large scale learnings for our workforce where we'll talk about the intersectionality of LGBTQ young people in other circumstances. This month, we've done training around DV and IPV in the community. Earlier this year, we've done trainings around sex trafficking, as well as immigration services for LGBTQI plus young people. So we really want to look at not just how our workforce can support LGBTQ youth, generally speaking, but also LGBTQ youth that have some sort of intersecting identity. ACS also has LGBTQ point people stationed throughout our foster care agencies that really provide ground level support to workers and young people so that young people can have a safe and affirming person per their foster care agency, and that there could be a worker in our foster care agencies that can really support line workers with affirming queer and trans kids. My office runs what we call the ACS LGBTQI Advocates Council. The California Center, who's also on here, is a part of that council. What we love from our council, which is made primarily up of attorneys like yourselves, we really want to hear from folks who are doing direct service work to see what the emerging needs of the population are so that we can respond. It's also a mechanism for ACS to update our advocates about the work that we're doing in community and on a policy level. And it's also a way for community to hold ACS accountable and have access to leadership like myself and other ACS individuals who might be on the call. We've got representatives from our permanency division as well as our family court legal services. My office also sends out biannually a comprehensive vetted resource guide that I'm happy to share with learners in this group. These are resources specifically NYC based that we know are safe, vetted, and affirming for queer and trans youth that are in ACS care. Foster parents are critical to the work that we're doing in keeping foster children safe. Every single foster parent has to take an LGBTQI competency training. Our most recent one was developed by the amazing Planned Parenthood Greater New York, and really looks at how every single child has a sexual orientation or gender identity or expression, which we call a SOGI, and how every single foster parent needs to know how to talk to their child about their sexual orientation and gender identity, even if the child is cisgender and heterosexual. This training gives foster parents who aren't in the muck of LGBTQI issues, like myself and my colleagues on the call, really provides folks with language on how to engage queer and trans youth and how to make them feel safe in said foster parents' homes. Every foster parent is mandated to take this training. Continuing on with training, speaking of mandates, ACS mandates that every single direct service staff, as well as every single direct services staff supervisor, has to take what we call an LGBTQAI foundational training. This learning, which is roughly a day long, really gives workers language, and also teaches workers about ACS policies and best practices that promote safety for the population in care. We also have a brand new refresher training. Having a workforce as large as ACS, it's always good to continually take up our trainings a notch and really provide learners with levels of. And so we have what we call refresher training. I really call it 2.0, where our refresher training is really building upon these foundational lessons that are learned in the first training around LGBTQI issues. 2 years later, every staff person who's under that said mandate is also then expected to take our refresher training, which really gives concrete scenarios and concrete practices around affirming young people, around derogatory language, about how using correct terminology can really protect a young person, and real ways to strategize to support youth's identity. And I referenced some training. I referenced this just a couple minutes ago. My office, we provide ground level, customized best practices trainings across the ACS spectrum. And some of them include just a general best practice for working with this youth population, as I mentioned before, DV and IPV, and working with youth that are at risk or who have experienced trafficking in some way, shape, or form. Well, our office also has written and holds on our ACS website what we call a safe and respected guide. This guide really gives workers a comprehensive book of how to work with trans and gender expansive youth. It provides workers with specific language and real techniques on how to make a trans or gender non-binary, gender non-conforming youth feel safe and affirmed. And so, you know, we are government, we are here to support across the entire city. If you have any issues or questions around a trans or queer, gender expansive, non-binary young person that is currently in ACS systems, whether they're in our child protection services, our family prevention services, foster care, or our juvenile justice services, please reach out. My office has a wide reach and a wide arm. We have supported workers in family court. We've supported workers in juvenile court, and really across the spectrum, we support workers in figuring out safe and affirming placements for queer and trans young people, as well as other things around, you know, safe discharges from foster care, safety planning for certain young people. We really can provide a myriad of supports across the system. And, you know, if folks are seeing young people being mistreated because of their gender identity or sexual orientation, please also reach out to my office. You know, one of our most important roles is to intervene when those situations do happen. And like I said, you know, we are a resource. Feel free to reach out. My office tries to be engaged in all aspects of the ACS community and the arms of the ACS reach. So, you know, lawyers that are working throughout the family court, is absolutely in our purview to provide support. And if needed, you know, escalate matters.
Thank you so much, Stephen. So before you go, there is a question that had come in. To what extent does your unit interact with the family court system, and predominantly on what issues?
Fairly in the recent years, more and more we've been interacting with the family court system, and I think that is because we're seeing more and more older young people in our system identifying specifically as trans or gender expansive. So I think what happens is, in particular, a judge might see a need for a more expert hand in supporting trans and gender expansive young people, whether it's like connecting them specifically to gender affirming care are figuring out outside resources or doing some sort of specific case planning. That's where we've been really, really working with family court attorneys and judges who ask us to sometimes show up into court to help support with a gender expansive kid, but it's really across the board. We've supported lawyers in figuring out placements for young people. We've definitely supported lawyers in advocating on behalf of our queer trans youth as well. So if folks do have a specific need or questions, I'll definitely put my email into the chat and feel free to reach out. Good question.
Thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate it. Like I indicated earlier in the intro, ACS obviously works directly with the youth through their foster care agencies that they contract with. And then Stephen and his team are obviously there to provide resources. I will say, I think that majority of jurists are at a disadvantage because they're just not aware of what resources are available. So when it comes to servicing these youth, to issuing orders, to ensuring that proper referrals are made, it's a little tough to do when you just don't know what's out there and what's available. And if jurists in general know that they have the option to reach out to your unit, for instance, to ask them to come in on a case virtually, especially now that everyone does have the option to join virtually almost any court appearance, even if it's in person, I think that just creates a lot of opportunity for judges to pull you or your staff in to just say, hey, like I have this youth and this is what the youth is here and this is what the youth needs. What can you help him with and what can you provide? Because often enough, unfortunately, there's so much turnover in foster care agencies and their staff.
Yep.
And because of that turnover, they're not there long enough to learn all the resources that are there and all the resources that are available. So the referrals aren't being made, and it's not necessarily their lack of trying. It's just a matter of turnover. There's only so much information you can provide that they can absorb, that they can ultimately then guide these youth and families. And so I think if perhaps the jurors serving, especially in family court, but especially serving the child protection aspect of cases in every borough, knew that that was an opportunity and that was a resource that they had available, I think perhaps they would be able to assist even if one youth that is going through something very specific and something that they just cannot find the resources for. I think it'd be really helpful. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jane. And yes, like I've appeared via Teams in family court, I think in all the 5 boroughs just in the last 2 years. And so we can be there to support. We will definitely make a way. And if folks do have like concrete questions about specific young people, specific cases that where a young person is definitely attached to ACS, whether it is child protection, juvenile justice, absolutely, and foster care, please reach out and we can support you in figuring out how to meet all the needs of the young people.
Just before we move on to the next speaker, I just want, for our listeners who may not be aware, the gay kid in foster care or the criminal justice system is not an anomaly. I didn't want to use stats initially because I figured somebody would touch on the stats at some point, but at the bare minimum, we figured out to be 30 to 35% of the children who are coming through the foster care system and the criminal justice system are identifying as LGBTQ. So this is a very needed service. This is something that has to be looked at. This is something that has to be addressed. And I, as a judge, and my colleagues need to be able to be made more aware of the services that are out there, what we can do. I've had multiple kids who either didn't want to go to a particular foster care, back into foster care because they were misunderstood or mistreated, or children who didn't want to go back to their own homes because I've indicated on another occasion where the father pummeled the kid in front of the high school. And when he was finally arrested, his answer was, I didn't want him to be like that anymore. So, this is a good chunk of the children that we're seeing, even if they don't identify or speak verbally. Over time, it becomes clear that they are identifying as gay or lesbian or trans, and their needs need to be addressed. And we as jurists and as lawyers need to be made aware that these kids are a large part of the children that we're seeing every day. in our courts. So thank you. For
Absolutely, Your Honor. And may I just add that, going back to statistics, and I really only said like one statistic, which was, we know that about 1/3 of young people in foster care identify as LGBTQ, at least from the data that we took almost 5 years ago. But we also know that young people who identify as LGBTQ that are in foster care are more prone to experience homelessness or being unhoused, are more prone to drug use, are more prone to bad interactions with the police. And so, I think it just really behooves us all to be aware of this vulnerable population so that we can support them in a greater capacity.
Thank you.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Alex Roque from the Ali Forney Center. And I'll turn it right over to him.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Judge, for organizing this. Stephen, so great to see you. Happy Pride, everyone. My name is Alex Roque. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the president and executive director of the Ali Forney Center. The Ali Forney Center is the nation's largest and most comprehensive organization dedicated to housing and caring for homeless, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender young people. These are young people who have been rejected by their families and thrown out into the streets. About 90% of the young people we see in our care every year tell us that family rejection is rooted in religious beliefs as a reason they are unhoused, which is a devastating crisis that exists not just in our city, but across all through our state, across our country, and around the globe. As such, in addition to the core direct services that I'll tell you about that we provide here, we also operate with 55 partner sites across the U.S., and we currently operate in 22 countries, really addressing this issue in as great as way possible. We're also looking to make systemic change. Last year alone, there were over 543 anti-LGBTQ bills presented in states across our country, Tennessee being the most notorious one. And this year alone, we have over 515 anti-LGBTQ bills, and it's mid-June, that are presented. The LGBT community is under attack, and our work as a provider, essential provider, is also to address and work within the systems that are causing these issues and being proactive in protecting our kids. Most recently, we hosted an event, a press conference, and a call to our city and our state to add these protections for our young people. These protections being the understanding that homophobia and transphobia by a parent is child abuse, and that our systems fail our kids once they are rejected by their families because of their identity. And there needs to be, we're not looking for kids to be removed from their homes. We're looking to help families do better by their kids. And I'm happy to share that ACS came to the table and had a very meaningful conversation and kickoff to a partnership on their approach to adopting homophobia and transphobia is child abuse, and how to get their workers to also understand that and protect our kids in that way. A little bit about us as an organization. I'm going to switch to a PowerPoint, and I'll show you a video just to break off the talking heads a bit so we can kind of have some interactive presentation. And I'm looking for my share screen button, and we're going to go here. And all right. Awesome. So, this is incredibly important for us. Ali Forney was 13 years old when he was kicked out of his home. He ended up in the foster care system. He was kicked out of his home because of his identity. His mother is quoted as saying that he was too gay. They had a number of workers come to their home, and there was nothing done for that family to help her embrace her child. And Ali was put in foster care. And Ali bounced around over 2 years in 8 different placements, where each home he met was also homophobic or transphobic towards him. And at the age of 15, Ali took to the streets where he felt safer than in the systems that were supposed to protect him. On the streets, Ali was a caregiver, a provider of community for others like him, and he built a body of what is now known as like youth internship or peer-led work in a time where it wasn't existent. He was a proud HIV activist and advocate and worker, where he went onto the streets providing condoms and education to his peers. He was also really involved in helping young people address drug use and substance use, and was really as described by many as an incredibly caring and generous person who's was really at the center point for so many communities that were unhoused, particularly queer and communities of color that were unhoused at that time. Tragically, in the late 90s, when Times Square was being cleaned out, Ali Fournier and a number of his friends or his community were pushed out to less safe neighborhoods. And Ali was one of many young people who were murdered in 1997. Ali was murdered on December 5th. 5 years after his murder, committed to his name and his memory, our founder, Carl Siciliano, opened the Ali Fournier Center with the mission to keep these kids safe. We opened in the basement of a church with 6 cots. And we had over 20 kids on that first night trying to get into those 6 cots. And within a week, we'd seen 100 kids trying to get into those 6 cots. And within 6 months, we saw 1,000 kids trying to get into those 6 cots. This is before social media, before the advent of smartphones, and before the immediacy of technology or immediacy of information. Kids were hearing about us through word of mouth, and they were not being cared for in the foster care system. They were not being cared for at even other shelters, as homophobia and transphobia is prevalent in our society. So it's really important that we're at the table with this conversation, given that Ali is a young person who would have been saved were it not for the systems that are armed against our community. Some stats as it relates to unhoused youth is that studies find that LGBTQ youth make up 40% of the homeless youth population in New York City. In December of 2007, there was a reported finding that showed these findings. It also shared that, so just that number alone it means that an LGBTQ young person is 120% more likely to be homeless than a non-LGBTQ young person. What we found is what we know what we see at the Ali Fournier Center every day. LGBTQ youth are 8 times more likely to experience violence in the streets. They're 8 times more likely to experience, to engage in sex work, be targeted, contract HIV, and sadly, consider ending their lives. So suicide ideation is very high in our unhoused youth population. And then these are some stats about the clients that we see. As I shared earlier, 90% of our young people are kicked out because of their identity. 10% run away due to abuse, neglect, or a combination of rejection and abuse. And this number, this last year alone, we saw over 2,200 youth in our care. And many of our clients come from other states. In fact, 50% of our clients come from New York, 40% come from across the country, mostly the South, and 10% come from outside of the United States. So this is a breakup of the client demographic. And then just some other stats related to our clients' engagement in identification, engagement with the police. 75% of our clients have a history of the police, and at least 20% of our clients are HIV positive. That number has changed. And then I want to show you a brief video that kind of captures our work in a very beautiful way.
In the beginning, it was very hard to advocate for LGBT youth because many people did not understand that there were queer youth, but that's clearly changed. The AFC's been on the forefront of that, pioneer of sort of informing people of who this community is and who we are. These are our youth. Once someone shows up at the Ali Fournier Center, our goal is to make sure we have everything you need.
When clients come to us, they get assigned a full care team. So a health counselor, case manager, and therapist or creative arts therapist. And then that team of people support and stay with them throughout their time in our programming. So they are able to build these long-term relationships, build the trust with their staff, and they're able to get all the things that they need.
Our new space on 38th Street is triple the size of our old drop-in space, and we're able to truly respond creatively to what our clients need.
So this includes our housing programs, which is our emergency housing, crisis housing, our transgender housing, transitional housing. Our drop-in hub is really supportive to our street homeless youth and youth that come in that need meals, a shower, a place to stay for our overnight program. Ali's Place also includes our health and wellness team, which is run by our mental health team, our health services team, as well as our transgender services team. We also include case management under there. And then our learning and life skills team, which is our current Air Unity Works program, where we provide educational and vocational support.
Trans housing is definitely a unique transitional housing program that AFC has. We service 16 to 20-year-old transgender and gender non-conforming individuals. Our residents are able to find a place that's not only supportive, but nurturing and affirming to them. And we provide a space for them to explore.
AFC started their first trans services program department in 2021, and we provide services for our trans and non-binary youth, such as gender affirming resources and information, getting consultations for gender affirming surgeries. Then we provide them with any necessary items they may need pre and post-surgery.
We also have on-site HIV testing, 2 health counselors, which meet with clients regularly to talk about HIV prevention, STI minimization, sex and relationships, also to talk about how they can use drugs more safely. And I think we've designed a lot of ways for our clients to get more involved in the work that we do and participate in like designing programs for themselves.
So Unity Works, we're constructed of a team of 4 navigators or caseworkers. So their responsibility is connecting with the young people, finding out what it is they need, formulating a service plan. So how we can help them, whether that's educationally, whether that's helping them pick up a certification for occupational training that'll lead to employment, or if that's helping them get back into school.
The model replication program came out of reality that half of our young people come from outside of New York. And that is because there weren't a lot of programs for a long time across the US that were able to provide drop-in or housing services for LGBTQ unhoused youth. And so we provide our whole model, training, education, and support to help programs start or expand so that young people don't have to travel all the way to New York to get affirming services and get it closer to home, which minimizes the risk of trauma and abuse that happens when folks need to be displaced due to being kicked out of their house or, having lack of community.
The work of the Ali Forney Center is
I'll stop sharing there and spare you more of me talking. So that was just a great overview of the work that we do, how comprehensive the nature of the work is. Really noting that while New York City especially is we have a beautiful LGBTQ and affirming bubble, although some of it's being threatened. Our young people still find themselves on the outskirts of the outskirts in being unhoused and being unaffirmed by their parents and in a host of, and also being failed by systems that are supposed to protect them. So even though we have an incredible community that's rich in services, LGBTQ unhoused youth still face unique challenges and are more likely to engage with us. As a result of that, we have built this organization that has essentially responded to every single one of their needs, including being a Department of Education school, which we started about 2 years ago, where we actually have 11th and 12th grade. So just more than anything, impressing upon how unique how unique these young people, the unique needs of this community, and how important it is to just have awareness and education on how we can protect them and support them, particularly in the systems. Like, if workers are not using the correct language or pronouns, it can be very damaging for a young person. If the legal system that's supposed to help them, if they're diminishing the fact that family rejection is a very detrimental thing, it's very damaging for them. So I'm happy to answer questions now or at the end and be more specific, and yeah, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. I don't see any questions in the chat box, so if anybody thinks of anything, definitely either send them over or let us know. And now I'm going to turn over to Jonah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Let me pull up my slides. Here we go. Folks should be able to see that now. As mentioned, my name is Jonah Chance. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm a senior research scientist at the Trevor Project. For folks who may not be aware, the Trevor Project is primarily best known for our crisis intervention services. So we operate 24/7 crisis lines via phone, chat, and text that are available to LGBTQ young people between the ages of 13 and 24 living in the United States, for someone to talk to, a trained counselor to speak with if they feel like they're in crisis. However, in addition to that really important work, we also have several other teams that do research, like my team. We also have some advocates who are helping to fight back some of the bad bills that have been mentioned and push stronger bills for better LGBTQ protections and better mental health education in schools. So we are a large organization with many pieces, but our crisis services is really our bread and butter. I'm here today to share a little bit about the research that we did specifically around homelessness and LGBTQ identity, with some intersections with foster care. And so I will jump in a little bit into our research frameworks. So our team really uses the minority stress model to guide our work, which essentially says that we do not believe that LGBTQ young people are inherently more mentally ill because of their LGBTQ identity, right? Which is a common talking point among some of our political opponents. However, what we believe and what our data show over and over and over again is actually the increased rates of suicide risk and mental health symptoms that we see among LGBTQ young people are the result of all sorts of different factors going on in their environment, including a lot of stress due to their minority identity and their minority status. So things like vulnerability to family rejection, discrimination, harassment, or violence, those are all very stressful, and we can expect to see a negative impact on a young person's mental health. And so that's why we tend to see these outcomes in this community. It's also important that we use an intersectional lens and we think about all the different identities that young people hold. And again, I unfortunately can't get into as much of that today, but our larger research agenda really does show that when folks have multiple marginalized identities, whether that's an LGBTQ identity and a BIPOC identity, or socioeconomic class or disability, we tend to see poor mental health among those folks because they are dealing with more environmental stress and more marginalization due to those identities, or due to the rejection of those identities, I should say. The data that I'm going to be talking about today come from our 2021 national survey on the mental health of LGBTQ young people. This was a sample of almost 35,000 LGBTQ young people ages 13 to 24 living across the United States. It is a relatively diverse sample. So we have almost 45% young people of color and nearly 40% who identify as transgender and non-binary. This is not our most recent survey. So if you've seen other survey data from our organization floating around there, I just want to name that this is a couple of years ago. However, this was the data set that we used to do our really extensive report on homelessness. I can say that when we look sort of broad level, we have seen that most of the numbers that I'm going to be sharing don't change a lot year over year. So this data is still really relevant. I'm going to jump in a little bit to our findings. But first, I'm going to talk about measuring. As a scientist, I feel compelled to talk a little bit more about how we measure things. If folks working in the field likely are very aware, it is very hard. LGBTQ young people, or I should say, young people experiencing homelessness and housing instability are very mobile, and they can be very difficult to contact and very difficult to get in touch with. It can be challenging to even just sort of assess their housing status because they may be on the streets one night and then crashing with a friend and then staying with family. And depending on what system they are interacting with, some of those situations may count as homelessness and some of them may not. And so that can make it very challenging. I won't walk through this entire slide for the sake of time, but the point I really want to drive home is that we ask multiple questions about a young person's housing status, both in the past and currently at the time that they are taking the survey. We also ask several questions about sleeping away from their family or caregivers, or running away from family or caregivers, both in general and due to LGBTQ rejection. From all those questions, we then created 3 groups to try and compare and look at different outcomes among young people. We found a small group, about 219, who reported they were homeless at the time of survey administration. That generally means that they reported they were living in some sort of housing program or on the streets. A much larger number, nearly 10,000, reported past housing instability. So some experience of running away from home, or staying away from their family, or staying on the streets. And then about 25,000 folks said that they were neither currently homeless nor had been homeless in the past. So just sort of looking more broadly over the prevalence in our sample. And again, this is a national sample, not just New York, but we found that over a quarter, 28% reported past or current housing instability. This aligns with what we see in data across the country. We see anywhere from 20 to 40% of young people experiencing homelessness reporting an LGBTQ identity at various research studies. Among those who told us they had experienced housing instability, 47% reported that they had been kicked out, and then 56% reported that they had run away or been abandoned. I think this aligns with what other presenters have said, but we have found that, for young people who are running away, it's usually because they fear they are going to be kicked out, or they fear some sort of violence or harassment. So it's not a decision that is taken lightly among young people. Family conflict is really a driving factor in all of this, as other folks have mentioned. 40% of the young people who said they had been kicked out, and 55% of the young people who said they had run away or been abandoned specifically reported that those experiences were due to some sort of mistreatment or fear of mistreatment due to their LGBTQ identity. So families' attitudes around LGBTQ identity are incredibly important and an important place for intervention. When we look at the demographics of the folks in our sample who reported housing instability, we find that we can see here different racial groups. The lowest rates are among our Asian American and Pacific Islander folks. And then the highest rates are among our Native and Indigenous young people, and as well as multiracial. Black, Latinx, and white young people sort of hang out here around 27%. Again, this sort of aligns with other studies across the United States. It also, unfortunately, really aligns with sort of other risk factors that we look at very frequently. Specifically, I want to note that our Native and Indigenous young people report some of the worst outcomes in almost every measure that we study, whether it's suicide, mental health outcomes, experiences of violence and discrimination. And so I just really want to highlight that that is a consistent finding and an important area for all of us as advocates to work on. We also take a look at gender identity. You can see here that folks here on the left with the lowest rates tend to be our cisgender boys and men and women and girls. We then see higher rates among our trans girls and women, pretty high rates among our non-binary young people, and then somewhat lower rates, again, among our gender questioning young people. Again, just sort of want to highlight that this aligns with general patterns that we see in our data pretty repeatedly. Our trans and non-binary young people tend to report the highest levels of risk, whether it's, again, where we're talking about discrimination or harassment, experiences with conversion therapy or attempts to change their identity. And so there's still work to be done for cisgender LGBT young people. I don't want to sort of say that everything is great for them, because that is still very challenging. But our trans and non-binary young people are really experiencing an extraordinarily vulnerability to all sorts of different harms. So then we look at our relationship between housing instability and mental health. On sort of a theoretical level, this makes a lot of sense, right? Being homeless or experiencing housing instability is incredibly damaging for your mental health. It's stressful, it's dangerous. And so these relationships are exactly what we would expect to see in the data, but it is nice to see them in detail. What we find is that both current and past experiences of housing instability are all associated with higher odds of recent mental health symptoms. We see here 2 times the greater odds of reporting recent depression or recent anxiety. Those are both measured within the last 2 weeks. Over 2 times the odds of recent self-harm. I believe that is measured in a year, although it might also be 2 weeks. Oops, excuse me, sorry, I'll move back. And then over 2 times the odds of seriously considering suicide in the past year, and nearly 4 times greater odds of attempting suicide in the past year. That 4 times odds ratio is very large. We see that in our data not terribly frequently, but among some of the most highest. That is a very strong relationship in our work. And these are all compared to their LGBTQ peers who don't report any sort of past housing instability. And we do try to control for various factors, right? Like sex assigned at birth, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, and census region, to really help us make sure that there's not any confounding variables. Here we can see just sort of the straight rates. So we're not looking at odds anymore. We're just looking at percentages. What I really want to point out here, we see self-harm, anxiety, and depression all presented together. To me, the key trend here is, again, something we would expect to see, but the risk goes up as your housing status gets more precarious, right? So we've got our folks over here on the left who've never experienced housing instability, who are much lower than the folks who've reported in the past, and the folks who are currently homeless are higher, right? But they're not quite. They're closer to the past. So housing instability is, in some ways, has some lasting power. It indicates that there is stuff going on in your life that is really challenging, and that probably hasn't been resolved by the time that you're taking the survey, especially since you have to be 24. So it probably has been a lot of time. And so both these past homelessness and current homelessness are very risky. Here is a similar chart just looking specifically at some of our measures of suicidal thoughts and behaviors. We've got our ideation here in blue and then attempts in purple. Again, we see that the folks with no housing instability report much lower, and then the folks who report housing instability are higher. They're sort of hanging together here, although again, that 35% rate among folks who are currently homeless, that's incredibly high. And there may be a little bit of a causal relationship going on there. We find that sometimes people attempt suicide. They're hospitalized either voluntarily or involuntarily. And then when they exit hospitalization, they don't have anywhere to go, especially if their family is not willing to take them back. And so particularly mental health hospitalization and housing instability can be sort of a related experience if it destabilizes folks' housing. Here is very relevant to what we've been talking about today, the relationship between foster care and housing instability. Again, this is not surprising. It aligns with a lot of different findings from different jurisdictions across the country. But it's really important to note that folks who reported any kind of housing instability reported nearly 6 times greater odds that they had been in foster care at any point in their life. These are point in time findings or sort of cross-sectional, which means we don't know which comes first, the foster care experience or the housing instability. We can't assign any sort of causal relationship between those two. And so it may be that folks first experience housing instability after entering the foster care system, or it may be that they all entered foster care first. But again, as other folks here today have pointed out, it's really important that we think about the relationship between foster care and housing instability, and we provide more support for folks exiting the foster care system to provide stable housing as they grow into young adulthood. Again, we see pretty strong relationships with two other experiences that we sort of associate with housing instability, and those are victimization, or being the victim of a physical attack due to your LGBTQ identity, and food insecurity. LGBTQ young people who report past and current housing instability report much higher rates of being threatened or abused due to their LGBTQ identity. Again, we don't know which comes first, chicken and egg situation. Being homeless is an incredibly dangerous situation, and some of those experiences of victimization may have caused young people to leave home and enter housing instability. So we're not sure which one comes first. And then the last one is perhaps the least surprising finding, but we see very strong relationships between housing instability and food insecurity. This makes a lot of sense. It's very challenging to feed yourself if you are, living on the streets. You don't know where your next meal is going to come. But this 72% of rate of food insecurity among folks experiencing current homelessness is extremely high. Those are probably the highest rates of food insecurity we see in our sample, although that's a little bit of a conjecture there. Do you want to provide some recommendations and some resources? Specifically in our report that we wrote several years ago, we provided some recommendations for folks serving this community. These really align with what other folks have said, and so I'll try to go pretty quickly. But helping families learn to support their LGBTQ people to prevent housing instability and prevent some of that family conflict is incredibly important. I'm excited to hear folks like the Center, ACS, and California trying to really work into this space. Thinking more about exit planning and providing resources for folks exiting foster care, as well as really bolstering anti-discrimination protections from schools and workplaces. When I think about sort of institutions that support young people in young adulthood, there's like home, school, and work. And if folks are struggling at home, school and work can be the spaces where sometimes they find support. But if they are having a hard time accessing the workplace because of anti-trans discrimination, that could be a domino that really, sets off a whole set of other negative outcomes for them. It's also incredibly important to increase funding for low barrier housing programs. And so when we say low barrier, we tend to mean not a lot of requirements for folks to be moving in. And so historically, there have been a lot of programs that required like sobriety or participation in certain programs. And certainly supporting sobriety can be very important, but requiring it before getting someone into housing, using a housing first model has a lot of data supporting that actually it's more important to get someone into that apartment or that safe space first before we start working on some of the substance use and mental health issues. Also thinking about, particularly with young people, there is a lot of pressure to get a lot done and to stabilize before aging out of whatever program you're in, whether that's foster care or LGBTQ services, even our own services, right? I said we only serve young people up until age 24. We have a lot of folks who call our crisis line who are older than that, and they have a hard time sometimes getting support because they are older. And so potentially removing those age requirements could be a way to really decrease some of that getting lost in the gaps. It's also important to really think about how we design and implement shelter services. A lot of young people do not feel safe staying in a shelter that is designed for adults, particularly for trans folks or LGBTQ couples who are in visible same-sex relationships. It can be very hard for them to feel safe accessing services because they are worried that they're going to be assigned to a dorm that doesn't align with their gender identity. There are existing protections that guarantee folks the right to stay in a facility that affirms their gender identity. However, enforcement in those services can be pretty patchy. So making sure that service providers are really thinking about LGBTQ young people when they design spaces, particularly spaces that historically have been segregated by sex. And then finally, looking at the big picture, right, and thinking about sort of our larger economic, and this is perhaps beyond the scope of folks on this call, but worth thinking about. We also encounter a lot of LGBTQ people who first become homeless with their families in childhood. And so, and a history of family homelessness is a major risk factor for continuing to struggle with housing in young adulthood and then again in adulthood. And so if we, making sure that all of our communities have adequate affordable housing, again, something important for young people who tend to work lower wage jobs and tend to have a much harder time affording sort of an entry level apartment. And then also making sure that entry level jobs pay a living wage because again, so many of the young people that we're working with do not have family support to rely on, right? And so they need jobs that can pay all of their bills. And that is incredibly difficult in this economy. So trying to think about ways that we can work on that. More specifically, we have some publications from our team that folks here might find useful. We have a report that I mention a lot to folks in the field about measuring youth sexual orientation and gender identity. If you are someone who writes intake forms or does any kind of evaluation or research on your own team, and you found yourself struggling to find, right questions that measure gender identity, this may be really helpful. We walk through several sets of questions, the ones we use in our surveys, ones that folks can use if they have less space, when we talk about the pros and cons. These are a couple of our recent publications. We have one about dating violence among LGBTQ youth, transgender girls' experiences with high school sports and choosing to play or not play, access to gender affirming healthcare, access to gender affirming documents. The message of all of our work, sort of in the broad picture, is support for LGBTQ young people is good for their mental health. Lack of support is bad for their mental health. And so that is the story that we tell over and over and over again with numbers. But this is a few places where we dig into some of the specifics. These resources are from our amazing content team, and they are more practical. They are less research oriented and more for adults who are working with young people. So we have several about talking about suicide and providing mental health support to young people, several about understanding gender identity. So if you have clients who are struggling to understand this whole concept, perhaps because their child has come out, that may be a good resource. We have a coming out handbook for young people, something about schools. We recently added a resource about advocacy and being an activist and ways to stay safe. Because we're seeing such an anti-LGBTQ climate right now, we have a lot of young people who are trying to get engaged, and that can be stressful for your mental health. So we have a guide for how to think about supporting yourself. And then also we have a really excellent guide about navigating identities and religion, which can be a really important one for families. I will stop there. Thrilled to get to answer questions. Thank you again for inviting me and having me. It's a real honor to get to speak with all the wonderful folks on this panel.
First of all, I want to by thanking all four of you for participating today. I'm not going to blow my horn. I'm going to blow our horn. I've been on the bench over 9 years now. When we did this program in September, at least as far as I'm aware, no other courthouse had made a presentation with respect to LGBTQ youth, at least in foster care and the criminal justice system. I am happy to report, I won't take credit for it, it goes to you, but there have been multiple programs since we've done this last September. So I'm glad that the word is getting out there and the hard work that you do. Very briefly, as I've said to Alex before, you guys are on the front line. I'm not. I sit there in the chair above everybody else, and everything's being filtered to me through everybody else that I hear. The attorneys, the caseworkers, the social workers. I don't hear from the children as much as I should. They don't come to court. They're advised not to come to court, whatever it is. So I need, you're my eyes and ears. You're telling me what's going on. I can say this, and I hate to say this, but as an older gay man, I know these were not the conversations that we're having in the 1980s. There were other crises to deal with at the time, but in the 80s and 90s, this wasn't an issue, and certainly not at the level of courts. So at least we've made some progress that, stuffy guys like me are willing to entertain this issue and bring it forward so that the lawyers, the caseworkers, the judges are aware of what these kids are going through. I hope we can do this again real soon. As I said, Ms. Miller had reached out to me and asked if we would do this for the state bar. I know the judiciary, at least the family court, are still very interested in having us do this. Alex brought a lot of new information today, as did Steve, and Jonah's work remains relevant because this is the reality. The homelessness, the mental health issues, the substance abuse issues, and not being loved or not feeling loved are what these kids are up against every day. So to the extent that we can utilize this system, such as it is, to move the ball forward, to make the place a little better for these children, at least get them heard, and they are children. And thank you, and I'm grateful to all of you and to everybody that took the time to participate in today's program. Thank you very much.
Okay, and following up on that note, I also would like to thank all of you for being here today and sharing all this important information with everyone. It's going to be recorded. It has been recorded actually, so it will be available. So if anyone listening here has other people who were not able to attend today, you will be able to access the recording later on. So thanks again. We appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedules to be here with us today. This does conclude our program. Thank you to everyone for joining us, and please enjoy the rest of your day and do your best to stay cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.